Today we're going to be talking about The Call of Cthulhu, which was first published by H.P. Lovecraft in the Weird Tales magazine in 1928. As with most of Lovecraft's stories, there is a specific narrator. In this case, we are following a young man who has inherited his great-uncle's estate, and he's going through the old man's things, trying to resolve his estate, and he finds this locked box, and he looks around for the key, looks in the office, looks at the house, can't find it. Finally finds the key on the key ring that the old man used to keep in his pocket, so his personal key ring that he keeps on his person at all times. So whatever's in this box is something he doesn't want other people to be able to get into. So he unlocks the box and he opens it up, and inside he finds a bunch of paperwork from all different things. A lot of them look like diary entries. There's some news clippings in there, and there is a clay tablet with a carving of some kind of creature and a bunch of hieroglyphs he doesn't recognize. Now, if you watch the Dagon video, which I posted last week, and I'll make sure that I link that somewhere, we already know that these hieroglyphs are kind of fishy in shape or fishy in theme, and are utterly unknown to modern-day archaeologists. So the nephew starts going through these papers, and the first one he comes across is from a few years ago, and there's this young artist who had some kind of fever dream the night of an earthquake that racked the city. And the man remembers the earthquake, and the artist had sought out his uncle or his great uncle because the guy's a professor, right? So he knows about weird stuff, archaeological things. And in this dream, this young artist was in a city he didn't recognize. It was all built out of these giant stone blocks that are much too large for people to move. All of the blocks were carved in these strange hieroglyphs, and from underneath the city, he heard this voice saying Cthulu Fatagan or something like that. I can't pronounce it, but I'll make sure I put it on the screen here for you. The phrase itself is what actually excites the professor's interest, the professor being the uncle, because he's heard it before. He is an archaeologist or a professor of some sort at a local university. I can't quite remember. Anyway, he's the kind of guy you would go to for this sort of thing. So the artist had woken up in the middle of carving this clay tablet. He'd been doing it while he was asleep. He doesn't recognize the creature. He doesn't recognize the symbols. He has no idea what it says. All he remembers is the city and the phrase that he heard over and over and over again. So the professor makes the artist promise that he will keep him updated if he has any more dreams like this, which the artist does. He starts to have them nightly. And the most commonly repeated phrases are Cthulhu and Relie or Relie. Again, I can't pronounce this stuff. It's not meant to be pronounceable, but I'll put the words on the screen for you. After a series of these daily calls where the artist is describing his dreams to the professor, the kid falls deathly ill and he has to be hospitalized. And he's in this sort of bizarre fever, like an illness. And the doctors say very specifically, this is not madness. This kid is sick, but we don't know why. And the artist is sort of in and out of delirium, and when he's asleep, he's thrashing around, and when he's awake, he's ranting about this thing that is miles high, miles high. That's all he keeps saying, and just repeating these phrases over and over. And then all of a sudden, he just snaps out of it, and the dreams stop, and he goes home, and he doesn't ever have another one. Other notes around this artist indicate that other people in the city were having similar problems. People he describes as salt of the earth, like laborers and workers, were having some difficulty sleeping, nothing too specific. They were just a little agitated. People that were involved in the sciences or related to the sciences were also having dreams that they described as seeing as strange landscapes and being overwhelmed with a sense of dread or a sense of doom. Other artists seem to be having dreams similar to what the artist was describing to the professor. They were in some strange city. They were hearing this voice saying these words over and over again. And all of them seem to have this sort of sense of impending dread or sense of impending doom. The sense of wrongness, that something wasn't as it should be or wasn't quite right. The next set of papers indicates that this isn't the first time the professor has heard of this Cthulhu. So we learn that 17 years before, he had assisted some police investigators down in Louisiana as they looked into a cult that was making sacrifices in the swamps. And they were all sort of worshiping this statue, and the statue was described this way. It represented a monster of vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus-like head whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on hind and forefeet, and long, narrow wings behind, which exactly described the relief that was carved into the clay tablet that the artist made while he was in his fever dream. So this investigation down in Louisiana, we have kind of a relayance of the lead inspector's experiences with that. And he describes that there were a bunch of people missing. And when they get there, they find this group of cultists sort of dancing around a bonfire. And in the middle of the bonfire is a stone. On top of the stone is this statue that was described. And then all around their fire circle are scaffolds with the missing people, and they're killed and hanging upside down, and their bodies are desecrated. So this is where we start to see the tinge of Lovecraft's own personal distaste for anything that is not white and New England. I'm going to spare you the details on that. There's a bunch of descriptions of the cultists, but they're all pretty racist and pretty aberrant to modern ears, and it's not important to the story, in my opinion, so we're just going to skip all that and say that the inspectors arrested some 40 people, they killed a handful of others, and then they took this little statuette as evidence. So the inspector starts to question the cultists, and one older man in particular is willing to talk to them, and he tells them that the cult worships the great old ones, and that they came from the stars, and that they landed on Earth and they died, and that they are buried beneath the earth and beneath the seas, and that they are dead but not dead. They're sleeping. They believe that someday their priest Cthulhu will rise from the depths of Rolye and will raise up these great old ones, and the great old ones will take over men's minds, and there will be murder and mayhem and dancing and joy and this sort of chaotic blood fest. And they seem to be looking very forward to that, and they're making these sacrifices to sort of help the stars align and help raise these elder gods. Which is where the inspector called in a bunch of professors, archaeologists and geologists and that sort of thing, to look at this statue and try to figure out what this cult is all about. And none of the archaeologists recognize the statue except for one who says that he experienced something very similar in a rural place in Iceland. And so all of the other archaeologists, they kind of all have this consensus that, like, they've never heard of this god. And the geologists look at the statue and they're like, that's not a terrestrial stone. That whatever that's carved from, that's not from Earth. So the nephew's leads kind of peter out after that, and then a few years later, he's helping a friend clear out the basement of a museum or a university or something, and he sees a scrap of paper, and it has a drawing of Cthulhu on it. And then with it is this account of a Norwegian man whose ship was attacked by pirates, and they bested the pirates, but their ship was sinking. So they commandeered the pirates' vessel, and they set off in the direction that the pirates had tried to get them not to go. And they wound up landing on this uncharted island that was covered in black slime. And if you'll remember from our video last week, which I'll link somewhere up here if you haven't seen it, the island in Dagon is also a big black island that appeared out of nowhere and is covered in black slime. So they land on this island, and in the center of the island is a hill, and in the center of the hill is a monolith, just like in Dagon. So we know that it's all related. And the only people that make it off the island alive are the Norwegian and one other. And he's really cagey in the description of this inspector's report that the nephew was reading. He's really cagey about how everyone dies. Like, they can tell that there's something wrong. They can tell that there's more to the story, but they cannot get him to say more than they fell into a crevice, they fell into the stone, and they didn't survive. He just won't go into detail, and they can't get him to go into detail. So the sketch comes from a sculpture that was in a shrine in the pirate's boat. So we, as readers, know that these pirates are Cthulhu cultists and that this island is somehow related to their cult worship. So the nephew decides he has got to talk to this Norwegian dude, only the Norwegian's gone home. He's back in Oslo. So he gets on a boat and he sails to Norway. And when he gets there, the guy's wife tells him he's dead. You know, he had a fateful accident. He never really recovered from his ordeal at sea. He was never the same after that, and he's died. But he's left this account, this diary, in English. And she couldn't read it, so somehow the nephew convinces her to hand it over to him because he's related to whatever business is written in the letters, or at least he assumes he is. So somehow he convinces her to give it to him, and then he reads it on the ship ride home. So the sailor describes this island, you know, wet, black, sticky, with a hill and a monolith, and the nephew determines that this is Rolje. This is the island that has risen up out of the sea, and that it's caused this earthquake that was felt all the way over on the east coast of the US, which is why all these people started having this dream, and the storm and the waves that it caused the Norwegian ship to be blown off course, and that's how they wound up running into the pirates in the first place, who, as we know, were cultists and were on their way out to the island to greet their gods. But the Norwegian and his crew don't know all of this. They don't know about the cult of Cthulhu because nobody knows about the cult of Cthulhu. So they just get off on this island and start exploring, and they decide that they're going to take some kind of souvenir. So they travel around and they look around, and finally they find this set of great doors, and on the doors is a carving of Cthulhu, which matches the statue that's in the shrine in the captain's quarters on the pirate ship that they arrived on. So they start poking around at these set of doors. They're too heavy for them to lift, but, you know, they sort of dig their fingers around the side and they find these little levers or latches or whatever, and the doors open themselves. And that's when they discover that it is a tomb or a sarcophagus of some sort, and down in the depths of this great black hole behind these doors, they can hear this sort of wet, sloppy, sloshing moving around down in the depths, and it's getting closer. You know, so they all sort of back up, and this giant creature sort of oozes and squeezes his way out of the doors, and he is described as green and gelatinous, and just like the carving that was on the doors, and just like the sculpture that was in the shrine on the pirate ship. The Norwegian described it as the size of a walking mountain, and two of the men just straight up fall down dead right then and there. They just die of fright. And then several of them are crushed by the creature's claws as it's sort of pulling itself out of the earth. The rest of them run back towards the ship, but one of them sort of falls into a stone that looks like it's something you can step on, but isn't, and he literally just falls into the earth, like just disappears. Lovecraft sort of tries to describe this non-Euclidean geometry, so basically just not angles, so round geometry, that the way that everything is built, and sort of tries to get you to understand that the rocks look like they're concave, but are really convex, and really look like they're convex, but are really concave. And so it's very difficult to navigate because you can't ever tell, you know, what's solid and what's pushing out and what's pulling in. And it's meant to be described as all very disorienting. In my opinion, he gets a little overboard with it. It's a little too much. But, you know, it's Lovecraftian horror, so, you know, the unknown is always the scariest thing, and he didn't really have a solid concept of shapes and matter and science. Some of that is from the era, and some of that's just the fact that he was uneducated. So yeah, you know, one of the guys just falls basically in through a stone into the earth, and he dies. And the only ones that make it back to the ship are the Norwegian and this one other dude, who is an absolute gibbering madman at that time. So they get on the ship, and they start the engine, and they start racing away. And this beast is sort of following them, and they think that they're going to escape, and then all of a sudden it gets in the water, and they realize it's aquatic and it's faster in the water. So with no other options and no way that they could possibly outrun this thing, they slam the boat into reverse and they drive the boat through its face. And Cthulhu is gelatinous and he just kind of dissolves. And so they drive the boat away, and then as they look behind them, they realize that it is reassembling itself. And that's when his companion absolutely loses it, goes completely mad, and dies. So then this Norwegian is found, and he sort of tells his account. He's very sketchy about the whole detail because he doesn't want to be seen as crazy and he doesn't want to ruin his life. But he's so shaken by the fact that he just never recovers. So that's the Call of Cthulhu. It's a little uncomfortable reading some of his descriptions of people with a modern eye. Lovecraft's racism was not out of place in its time, but for someone in 2022 reading it, it is uncomfortable to read. The story is cool. I wish it didn't have those elements, but it's a product of its time. Since the 1920s, the Cthulhu mythos and the concept of the elder gods has pervaded our modern psyche, and it's just kind of part of our world now. It's in horror stories, it's in sci-fi, it's all over the place, and I don't know that he realized that he was making the legacy that he was when he wrote it. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and of course if you like the way that I present information, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell down below. You can find all of my social media contacts in the description, and of course if you want to keep up with me and the progress I'm making on my current novel, you can do that at effywritesbooks.com. Thank you so much for watching, have an excellent day, and I'll see you next time.